Thank you for joining us for the second of two Ask Alumni live webinars on how to prepare for career progression. This week we'll be looking at interviews with our expert panel. This is the fifth in a series of live stream events planned for this year to provide the alumni community insightful career advice and resources, especially in these challenging times. For those who came to last week's session, welcome back. We're glad to have you again. For those who are here for the first time, my name is Meg Dench. I'm the Manager of the Careers and Employability Service here at the University of Melbourne. I lead a team dedicated to improving student experience and innovating career development, drawing on skills and experience gathered from leadership roles in higher education and not-for-profit arts and cultural organisations, as well as various voluntary not-for-profit governance and development positions, including my most recent role on the board of the Feminist Writers Festival. Before we continue, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land I am on today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, as well as the traditional owners of the land that you are situated on. As we bring together our voices and stories here, I acknowledge that Indigenous Australians have been custodians of the lands and waterways of Australia and carried educational practice and storytelling for thousands of years, a sovereignty that was never ceded. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, and those First Nations people in your lands. Our event tonight has been developed to assist young graduates 1 to 5 years out from their degree who are looking to progress their careers. However, whether you are considering a new role or taking first career steps, we hope you'll find this session useful. We will endeavour to explore how to adapt to changing circumstances and set yourself up for success, with top tips for young professionals when applying for new roles during difficult times. We'll look at what recruiters really want from candidates and how applicants can put their best self forward. We're joined online tonight by Anna Horton, who is a team leader at IPA Recruitment. Anna heads up the commercial temper division and has strong client and candidate management experience gained from her 16 years in recruitment. Her areas of expertise include how to create a standout resume and how to succeed in the job application process. Liz Duncan, currently talent management leader and account director at Right Management, graduated from the University of Melbourne with a Bachelor of Music Education and started out as a teacher before pivoting to the corporate world and leading a successful career in recruitment and talent. With more than 20 years' experience, including 8 years as a director of a global recruitment firm, Liz has coached candidates to overcome hurdles and achieve their goals. Joining us from Singapore again tonight is Samantha Tan. Samantha graduated from the University of Melbourne in 2009 with a Bachelor of Commerce and is now a professional development and staffing specialist at McKinsey & Company in Southeast Asia. She has more than 10 years of industry experience in talent acquisition and development roles and was previously a senior recruiter at McKinsey & Company Southeast Asia, Barclays Capital APAC and Telstra Australia. Our panellists have navigated a range of career experiences and they are here to share these insights with us tonight. So thank you, panellists, for joining us again. So here we go. You've worked hard at tailoring and presenting yourself in the application process and now have been invited to interview. Congratulations. What next? We'll follow this evening the rather linear journey that is presented through interviewing process before, during and after. And to start us off, Samantha, can you explain to us the value of researching an organisation? Why is it valuable and what should our alumni do to research well?
Great, thanks Meg, and welcome everyone to the session today. So in terms of preparing for your interview, this is going to be really, really important in terms of research, right? There are so many different companies and industries out there, and it's really important that you immerse yourself in the jargon, the type of interview techniques that are used for your specific company that you've been invited to. One tip to start us off this evening would be simply to reconnect, right? I think that's a very simple way of putting it. Reconnecting with people that you know from your either first, second, or sometimes even third connections. And you can even use LinkedIn to help you. If you haven't actually toggled around with some of the features on LinkedIn, it's really, really straightforward just to click on a company name and then figure out kind of who the mutual friends are that you have, or who might come from your university who are now currently in that company. By doing that, you can very easily, drop in new connections, ask questions in advance regarding, things that are on your mind. Maybe culture, the type of work that you actually be doing. Different roles also mean different things in different companies. So you can very easily reach out to these people to ask them things that might help you understand your interview better in advance. Another thing is reading up on the news. I think in my time as a recruiter, I've very often got questions from folks that very easily I can tell they've not actually done their research, right? If they're asking about certain plans that actually the firm has released on the news recently, that's a very simple way to show that you're up to date with where the company is going, and to show your interest and passion in where the company is headed towards as well in the future. Hope that starts us off on the right foot.
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks, Samantha. Any Liz or Anna, would you like to add to that?
Happy to kind of give some thoughts too in preparation. Just carrying on from what Samantha was saying, I think, again, just doing that pre-work, as we said, we've talked about last week a bit about mindset, and doing that kind of work on yourself, I guess, really, to reconnect with who you are before you go into just starting to talk or scheduling and thinking of content, but actually taking it a step back and making sure that you've actually started to check all the things that you've got in place as well, that you've got actually a copy of a position description, that you know who the people are going to be. And so just doing a bit of a checklist, I think, in a calm way beforehand is a really good way to settle before you go into an interview process.
When we talk about preparing our documents and reviewing our documents, I think that's a really great tip to folk. What do you think is a practical preparation for that review of documents, both their own application but also the job documents, and what might they draw out of those in a practical way to take to the interview?
I'll keep going, Billy.
Yeah.
Great question, Meg. So the job description is going to provide the clues for the types of questions that may well be asked, because the task or responsibilities and the language that's used is going to provide clues to the sorts of things they want to see, evidence that you have done, or evidence that you have a particular way of doing things as well. So it'll be about your soft skills as much as your sort of technical skills, if you like. So reviewing that and almost doing a check off against your resume, and producing a document. One of the tools that I like to use and talk to people about is preparing a bit of a worksheet with sort of 3 columns and sample questions that you're anticipating you might get asked, and documenting perhaps 3 different examples of how you could articulate that. So if it's around customer or if it's around stakeholders, preparing yourself by actually giving yourself some bullet points about where you've demonstrated that and what the outcome was, because particularly when you're under pressure, you can forget, in the flow of conversation, or you can spend too long talking to one point and then come away from your interview and think, oh, I should have spoken about this and I should have spoken about that, which we all do all the time. So I think just having that little prep sheet where you've actually helped yourself by articulating some of those achievements helps you calm the nerves, but it also means you can refer to different examples when you sort of have a mental blank. So I think that can't be understated, the importance of doing that preparation.
Thank you. So I think we've covered a little bit, just to make sure before we move on from this sort of the research of self. Is there anything else we need to talk to our alumni about in terms of that reflection at the start, and how valuable it might be before we move on to some of the more practical other presentation perhaps pieces? And I'm thinking here about, we've talked as a group about the elevator pitch, that reflection that helps inform those pieces. Are there particular, how much is enough? Perhaps it's a good question.
Yeah.
Samantha?
Yeah, Meg. So I think one thing to remember is that we still want to come across as ourselves in an interview. From my experience dealing with plenty of graduates in particular, I do find that we have a certain, idea or notion of what a specific title means or should look like. So say, how a consultant should speak, or how an investment banker should behave, right? And that quite often takes away from your genuine and authentic self when we try too hard to fit into a mold that we have in mind. So reflect back, right? Think about who you want to portray, whether it's the super energetic, cheery self that you are, or the very logical thinker that you are. Don't take those things away from you when you go to your interview. And in preparation as well, when we talk about techniques, right? So for example, if you're going to be doing a case study interview, there are plenty of materials out there and structures, frameworks to memorize and learn. But don't forget, you come with your own common sense as well, right? So in my time in consulting, I found that so many candidates come with, basically like 10 frameworks that they think they need to apply in order to get the job. And when thrown a very simple problem, they just, it's kind of like a textbook. Okay, it has to be one of these 10. I have to force fit it somehow. When actually the answer comes very, very naturally if you just kind of stepped back and thought about it normally. So don't over prepare as well, because it does show itself to be very, very textbooky when you do that.
Wise words. It's a fine balance, isn't it? I think that's something worth acknowledging. Sometimes comes through practice, and we'll touch on that in a minute as well. I'd love to ask of the panel, is it important in reflection as well to think about their current situation and the year that's been in the preparation for their questions and for the interview? Is that something that's of importance to employers? Do they want to hear about, the COVID-19 year in the stories from applicants?
My personal view is that they do, and I think it's a prime opportunity to weave something into the conversation around resilience, a whole range of different skills really that you can demonstrate. Creativity with constraints we spoke about, or having to just pivot quickly and change how you think and how you approach things and your expectations. So I think it's a great idea to prepare for a question around that, which might even occur just as part of the warming up question with someone. It might be to relax you at the start of the interview. It might be a bit of a chat about everything that's going on. So don't miss that opportunity, I think, to kind of talk about your observations potentially and your personal thoughts, but also how that might apply. What are the learnings from this challenging year that you might take into inform your professional self and add value differently in a way that you weren't thinking about. I think that people in jobs, in HR, in management are all changing how they've operated. And I think anyone moving jobs too has to have that lens of, well, how is this going to impact how we did things and how we're going to do things going forward? So, yeah, it's a great opportunity.
Thank you. Now, Anna, I'd love to hear from you, if you wouldn't mind giving us some we've talked through sort of the thinking, the mental preparation, the sort of background work, but what's the physical? What are the pieces that our candidates need to think about when they're setting themselves up for this interview that, that's now in a virtual world, not physical, but it does require their sort of energy and focus.
Yeah, thanks. Nice to be on. Thanks, everybody. There is, there is that fine line, as Sam mentioned before, about being too over-prepared, but also you've got to make sure that you are prepared enough. And I think COVID-19 has really changed the scope of the way interviews can be conducted. The fundamentals don't go away. You essentially need to make a great impression when you're in an interview. So you essentially are being auditioned. So you do need to prepare yourself in a way that, dress, make sure you dress appropriately for the interview, regardless if it's online or if it's a face-to-face. But the other thing that I think is really key, and something as a recruiter I've come across quite thoroughly in the last 6 months, is the fact that all interviews now are currently done virtually. Now, it is really, really key to make sure that you are checking that your platform that you're using for your virtual interview works before your interview. And I can't stress that enough, because as a recruiter or even as an employer, it's extremely difficult. You might as well have a phone interview, which is not the same as a face-to-face, and you as a face-to-face interview really get a good impression of somebody. So I can't stress enough, please make sure that your online platform works, that you can hear people, you can see people. Please also make sure that you do have yourself in a quiet room, that you haven't got a dog barking in the background, or the garbage truck coming through at that point. It is really, really distracting not only for yourself but also for us. So just make sure you pick the right time that works for you, and that you are in a room that's, you are by yourself in. The other thing as well, and I'm a big believer of this, is practice your interview in front of the mirror or a friend. I'm really big on that. I think it really helps your nerves a lot. And every person that you interview can be very different. You may get an interviewer that has a style that's quite more relaxed, makes you more relaxed in the interview, or you may have someone that interviews you that is straight to the point, need to get that answer out, and sometimes doesn't come across as very personable. So you do need to make sure you prepare yourself for various different types of interviews. I think that's also really key. And just try and get some information on your audience. Find out who your interviewer is if you can. The beauty about a recruiter is that generally you're meeting with that recruiter first before you present it to the company. So if you've got through your first interview with your recruiter and you're being presented for your interview with the employer, ask your recruiter, what's the person like that I'm interviewing with? Do you know the style of interview that's going to be conducted? That's what the recruiter's there for. So make sure you utilise their expertise in that way.
Thanks, Anna. They're really helpful tips. I think I have a quick follow-up question to that, because I think if you haven't dealt with an external recruiter necessarily before, is that interview with the preliminary interview with the recruiter, again, is it sort of akin to two interviews, or is it a phone interview? It is a pre-chat. How is it different? So it'd be good to just clarify a little bit, I think, for our candidates.
Yeah, absolutely. I think with a recruiter, before you get brought into an interview with a recruiter, you will always have what we call a screening call, which is a pre-phone interview call, just to get an understanding if you're right for the role, and it's more of a shorter conversation. But the interview with the recruiter needs to be presented in exactly the same way that you would any employer, because ultimately you've got to get past the recruiter to get into the employer to be presented. So please make sure you make it as important as any other interview. But your phone interview does need to be, the screening call needs to be great to get yourself in for that interview, and then to be presented to the client, basically.
Thank you. I think it's just reminds us all it's a process, and it takes time and takes energy. You have to see it through. If you put all that effort so far, you have to maintain the effort and keep up, presenting strongly throughout the conversations that you're having, regardless of what they are. Could I touch briefly and draw from your experience, Liz, to just expand a little bit on the value of your personal branding on LinkedIn in that preparation stage, and just to talk through a little bit more about, is it important to refresh or relook at that?
I think we touched on this last week somewhat, and it's all interrelated. So just being clear on your brand, on you as a product. It's like thinking of yourself as a product when you're going for a job, and what is that employer going to see in that product, and making sure the story that it aligns and that you're comfortable talking about that. So yes, refreshing, making sure that your LinkedIn, because they will have checked your LinkedIn page or profile before meeting with you. So all of that is really important. And then sort of, sometimes when you're updating your LinkedIn profile, you can use that to help you prepare for the interview, as well as you're articulating your elevator pitch, as we call it. So you mentioned that earlier in the session, Meg, but the elevator pitch is, a 30-second or a 60-second introduction to who you are, and imagining that you're in the elevator and you're stuck there with the CEO or the MD, and what are you going to say to them as you're travelling in the elevator? So I think, again, when you're a new graduate or early in your career, it's very easy just to say, well, you really just talk about your degree. And, I've heard a lot of these sorts of conversations where, I've got a Bachelor of Commerce, for example, and I want to get into management consulting, and that's kind of their pitch, and really it's kind of very basic, and it's not enough that's going to sway someone or make them want to ask you more questions. So it's thinking about, if you're asked that question around your brand, it's about who am I, what do I do, and what impact have I made, or what impact can I make? So thinking about that and making that a stronger statement. So, it might be, I've got a Bachelor of Commerce, I'd like to apply my insights and my analysis skills to an organisation and help them transform their customer experience, for example, or, whatever is unique to your space. Is just thinking about making it an impactful statement. Doesn't have to be fake, but I think it starts a conversation then after that, and is a little bit more interesting and engaging for the interviewer to then sort of drive into more about you.
Liz, you made me think of one other tip that I had, which was a very simple one. It's to look back on your application to begin with, because, especially when we're starting out, we filled out so many applications and cover letters that sometimes we forget what we add in there. And your interviewer might kind of go back and go, hey, can you tell me more about X? And you're like, oh, I forgot that I even had that in my CV, and you're not prepped. So go back and remind yourself what exactly you had presented yourself to be on your cover letter and your resume before you actually went for your interview.
That's a great tip. Both great tips, I think, actually, around the preparation, and that authenticity keeps popping up as a theme, obviously, in our discussion. How to be authentic, the challenge of remaining authentic or the feeling of inauthenticity when you've practiced something are employers looking for it? And I think we've touched on a little bit of they want to see you shine through, but perhaps Samantha, can you expand a little bit on that authenticity and the value of it specifically, but perhaps to provide some reassurance to our alum on the value of the preparation as well.
Yeah, sure. So maybe just to give you some context, lots of companies these days like to use what we call strength-based interviewing. And what that really means is the interviewer wants to see where your passion and where your energies are derived from. And so this can really come from any part of your life, literally, right? Whether it's something that you're very passionate about in the workplace, or even outside of it, whether it's a hobby or a competitive sport that you take part in. So when we talk about bringing the whole self and being authentic, it's important to prepare some examples where you talk about things outside of the workplace to demonstrate where you actually are very motivated by, because it comes through, right? When I lie about, say, being really passionate about numbers and calculations in Excel, I think you'd very easily see it through my facial expressions that it's a lie. And interviewers can tell, right, very quickly if you're not saying the truth. So be careful if you are going to create something different from who you actually are. I'd strongly suggest to lean into something that you're comfortable with.
I'll add a little example to that, Samantha, too, because I think those are the things that we as recruiters want to see. But I've been driving my Year 11 daughter mad because she has been teaching house dance over Zoom for the last few months and teaching Year 7 to 10. And I keep saying to her, you need to remember this as an example of how you've had to change how you're doing, because it's been really hard trying to teach kids over Zoom and all the challenges she's had with that. And I said, when you're going for a job interview, this is a great example that you can use. And of course, she doesn't care because she's in Year 11, but it's these sorts of things outside of work, or it could be the casual job or hobbies, etc., that actually, I think it's where people come to life when they talk about their passions as well, that hiring managers are really keen to see your passions. And I think you do talk more naturally about things, projects, hobbies, other things that you've done that actually talk to who you are and what you've been able to achieve.
Great advice. And I think the challenge of it, if I can add that too, is that they're often seen as separate, particularly when we talk to students. They're seen as sort of extracurricular or something other to, but we know that those skills are transferable across the many facets of our lives, and you can be applying skills from jobs into your personal life and back through, sort of in and out all the time. So it's they shouldn't be seen as distinct, as you're saying. It's sort of cohesive as a whole for the whole person. We've started off there, which is great. Samantha, you touched on there sort of the formats of interviews, and we sort of, you mentioned their behavioural and strengths-based interviews. Anna, can you talk to us a little bit more about that from a recruiter's perspective, what that looks like in sort of practical terms, from what you want to see from candidates when they start in that interview format style?
Yeah, sure. I think one thing to always remember is that every interview that you go to, every interview is going to be different. So, you've got to, you've really got to make sure that you prepare yourself for all different types. But I suppose as a recruiter and the sorts of things I look for when I'm in an interview is that I'm not only looking for the experience and reasonings behind why you want a job, etc. But I'm also having a look to see will you fit well in the culture of the company? Will you report? Will you get on well with the manager? Those sorts of things. So I am looking at various different things. The other things that are very simple, like, can you commit to a job? Are you someone that's reliable? There's so many various different things a recruiter and employer is looking for. And the way we look for those sorts of things is a variety of different ways. We can go through asking various behavioural questions and how you dealt and how you, give me an example of a particular task or experience that you had. It could be some very personal sort of questions, talk me through what you did on the weekend, depending on what, and it really, there's so many various different types of interview styles. As an interviewer, I also can change my style during that interview depending on the person that I have in front of me. So one of the biggest thing, and it does draw back to what Samantha, I think, and Liz potentially just said, is be real. Don't talk. Talk the truth, because we can see through it very, very quickly and very, very easily. I personally like to make my candidates feel as relaxed as possible, because I think as an interviewer I get a lot more out of them that way. But as I said, be true to yourself, go in there and do your best, and that's all we can really ask for at the end of the day.
Thank you. Can I ask a follow-up question of you, Anna? You touched there on sort of what your role is in the session. Can you? I think there's something about the when do I ask questions? How is this going to run? Can you just give us a bit of a, you talked about, and we had a conversation today about when is the right time to ask questions. What's your role in the opening introduction? What happens in that sort of section there of the interview?
Sure. Look, I think it's really key to bring questions to an interview. You will find that some of your questions may be answered during the interview. I personally, as a recruiter, will always, when I sit people down or log in, talk them through how the interview structure is going to be. I generally leave question time to the end, but there is always times during the interview that they may ask. I think it's just important that as someone that's looking for a role, you probably have 100 questions. Don't come in and just list the 100 questions straight off the bat, because it just doesn't give us time to one of the reasons we ask so many questions is because we like to get a sense of what you like, and sometimes we answer those questions during it. So just some recruiters will tell you how the interview is going to be. Other times, just hold back a little bit. Don't go too full on too quickly, and you'll see how that progresses.
Thank you, Liz or Samantha. Did you want to add to that? Shall I move on to the next?
Oh, no, we're still talking about types of interviews, are we?
Yes.
I'm trying to think what was our original question on that. Yeah, look, I think again, actually I was thinking there was another point Anna made earlier today, or as we've been chatting, which was make sure you don't talk over the recruiter or the person running the interview. And I think that was an important one to mention as well. that don't go in and have nerves, which mean that you just start talking a lot and the other person can't get a word in. So I guess pausing and, as Anna said, saving questions towards the end. My view is, again, the questions really should be either over the phone or over email in preparation, and fairly relaxed at the start of the interview. And then usually most interviewers will ask for those questions in the last 10 minutes. And you may have a few key questions, but it's then perhaps appropriate to say, if I have any other questions, or the interviewer will say, if you have any other questions, and they may encourage you to email them, or they'll explain to you what the next steps are there. So I don't think it matters if you haven't had all your questions answered in the first interview, because it's really more still about you convincing them that you're worthy of the next conversation. So I wouldn't worry if I haven't answered everything in that first interview, but reflect on your own performance.
I think that questions, what to ask, what not to ask, is actually a really good follow-up to that. So what are the questions that candidates should be asking in an interview, in that first interview, and what should they not be asking or talking about? Liz, do you want to pick? Oh, Samantha, please.
Yeah, sure. So in terms of what not to ask, definitely I think for the first interview, remember that the ball's not in your court yet. So I try to avoid talking about or asking about, say, compensation, or how fast can I expect myself to be promoted to the next level. And also, we talked, I think, last week about negative experiences. I think it's important as well to not bring to the table too many negative experiences from your past roles.
Liz, did you want to expand on that too?
I'm just trying to think what else I could add to that. What not to do, same thing. It's not the opportunity for salary or comparing, or again looking for promotional questions. What to ask, I guess, if you're wanting to make an impact, is really thinking about what a good question is while you're there, in terms of something that you can do to add value to them, understanding where they're going to strategically, and asking a pointed question about what does the strategy mean for this role, or has someone been in that role? Like, how do they see that role, the success, what does success look like in this role? That's a good question to ask. What does success look like? So
we've had some questions that have come through from the audience beforehand that I just want to throw to you now. And one of them was, and it's a consolidated question, was how to answer the why this employer and why this job. Sort of answer those questions well. I think we've touched on it a little bit, but perhaps if we could answer that specific question directly, that would be really helpful to our viewers. Liz, you're already off mute. Perhaps you could kick off if you feel comfortable, or handball.
The thing not to do is not to act like you can't remember how many applications you've got and all the companies are the same again. And the trouble with Zoom is, I think that it's lessening people's, it's making it more casual. So don't be casual about this at all. Again, do the prep work on the company, but it's okay still not to know everything about it. It's okay to flatter the brand, to say I'm looking to work in a reputable brand, a company that's large enough that it's got a lot of business or whatever that is, and an opportunity to make an impact. And I understand that they invest, that your company invests in people development and learning and development, which is really important part of my values. It's kind of finding the things. It's not hard, I think, in the age of digital to understand why it is that you want to work there. And usually it's because of reputation, or it is a significant brand, or there's an opportunity for you to do something. So I think it's just being clear on what that opportunity is, and not making it sound like you're really trying to kind of impress them, but it needs to sound, again, coming back to that authentic piece, it needs to sound genuine, that you really believe it.
Thanks. Samantha, did you want to add to that? Or yeah.
Yeah, sure. So I think in terms of why do you want the role, think back to maybe your previous experiences and compare it with the job description that you have on hand, right? What is it from your past that you can actually bring to the table to this role that's going to make you an extra special candidate? Those things will make you stand out, right? Another thing is many employers also look for cultural fit. So it's not too early to kind of just dig a little deeper to find out what the values of this company are like. What are the typical work styles, and why do you think you'd be a fit from that perspective, apart from just the hard or technical skills?
That's a great weaving in of cultural fit, which is sometimes hard. Again, we talked about that last week about how to match yourself culturally to an organisation. Let's move on. We hadn't touched on, when we talked about formats, we skipped a little bit over assessment centres, and I think that sometimes it's, depending on where you're up to in your career trajectory, it's it tends to happen more at an entry level. But let's perhaps we could just quickly touch on that now to talk about the difference between the formats for assessment centres and a sort of perhaps a more panel or direct interview process. Liz, would you mind expanding on that, or Anna?
I'm happy to kick off, and Anna can jump in as well. Assessment centres I think are still really important, and all the resourcing leaders that I speak with still have some kind of assessment centre approach. But a lot of that, even prior to this year, a lot of this sort of recruitment, I guess, on a volume level has gone online, and some people, I guess, on this panel, I'd imagine, will have already gone through some companies' recruitment processes where they've changed them completely and they don't want to look at your resume as the first point of entry. They actually want you to take an online cognitive test. They might ask you to do a gamification selection or assessment. And then, when you make it through that, you might be asked to submit a resume and you may get an interview. So I think we're in a world now where recruitment processes can vary. They can still be very traditional and very old school, just submit your resume in a typical way with a cover letter, or they may be digitised with assessments first before you ever get to speak to someone. I think just going back to the assessment centre, the point of companies doing an assessment centre, however it's delivered, is really to get an understanding of your cognitive skills, your problem solving skills, and who you are as a person. So I think it's just trying to be aware of that. And again, it's usually about participating or collaborating and coming up with some ideas. It's not necessarily about having to have all the ideas. It's an employer wanting to see your team skills as much as your leadership skills as well. And actually, it'd be interesting if anyone did towards the end comment in the Q&A whether they've done an assessment centre virtually, in recent times, because I think there's a lot of talk about that becoming more and more virtual as we go along.
Can I just add to that as well, Liz? With everything that Liz has said, and interestingly, over the course of the 6 months, I've run lots of assessment centres before, and used to run a lot prior to COVID. And interestingly, we tried one assessment centre virtually, and it was, to be honest, a disaster. So a lot more I think a lot of assessment centres are going to become less and less. What I'm finding as well now, which I didn't see as much, and I know they're around a lot, is a lot more panel interviews. Because what happens, because virtually you can be on a Zoom or a meeting, MS meetings with, a number of different people, people are finding panel interviews a lot more easier, I suppose, less time consuming, and I think you can bounce off different people as well. So I'm finding panel interviews a lot more popular, and at times it just will change with times. And one thing, a lot of reason assessment centres were done was because it wanted to have a look at your team fit and how you fit well in a team, and putting people all into a room these days is out the window. So they need to look at different other ways to assess those different parts of the assessment centre.
Maybe just to add on, in terms of, coming back to the idea of formats, I do know of certain companies who these days they use a lot of virtual interviewers. So pretty much for the pre-screen, you're actually going to be talking to your computer, which would be recorded. And then only after you clear that round, then you get to a real person. So don't be surprised if that comes your way. It's just, how I suppose certain companies want to run their processes. It's not meant to be, overly impersonal. So do it as if you're going to be meeting with somebody in terms of like preparing your background, your body language, etc. Do it all the same as you would.
It's happening here too, Samantha, the virtual interviewer or the chat bot. Not necessarily mainstream yet, but I know a few companies doing it. But I think early feedback from a lot of candidates is that it's actually easier than talking to a person because, it's not as scary, and I think you get time to take your time. It's to make it a transparent and a non-biased approach to make sure that they really are assessing people evenly. So from that perspective, it's actually quite a positive thing, I think, if you're in early career.
We've used them here at the university for our internship program because it's deployed across the university. So it was a time management thing of many hiring local managers and many student applicants. And so it was quite effective in, but I think we were providing a lot of resources to the students to prepare, but it was an interesting process to go through using a platform and the questions that you're choosing and the hiring manager's response as well of how it worked. So something for candidates to keep in mind. So I'm going to now put to our audience to please, if you haven't already popped your question into the Q&A, please do so. We are heading into the final leg of our linear journey with interviews into the post-interview phase. And so if you haven't popped something there, please do, and we'll get to those in about 5 minutes. So what happens next? Let's say you've finished the interview or the interview's getting to the end. How do I know what's going to happen as a candidate? How do I know what's going to happen after this? What should I expect? And let's assume you've been through it, but maybe your experience has been different. What's the sort of standard fare for knowing what comes next and what I should do next? So I'm going to throw to Anna just quickly to kick it off.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Look, everybody's very different. So, what should happen is at the end of an interview, the person you're interviewing should basically outline the process and, explain that, we're conducting interviews to the end of the week, then we'll be making our shortlist. And, if an interviewer says to you, I will call you on this date to let you know the next steps or where you're at in the process, then they should do it. I'm going to be honest, there are people out there that just don't, and it's unfair, and I get it. Everybody's very different, but I suppose don't be disheartened. If you do get through that interview stage, you should at least be getting the phone call to let you know if you've progressed to the next stage or not. But as I said, sometimes that doesn't happen. It doesn't happen a lot when it's a bulk recruitment type of process, because if you're just putting it out there trying to recruit 50 call centre customer service staff, and you've been running 5 different assessment centres with 300 people, some people, unfortunately, there are people that fall through the cracks. So I suppose what I'm trying to say is, feel free to ask at the end of an interview, what's now, what happens now? What is the next stage? What is the process? I think that's really important. Would you, Liz, what would you?
And you could ask at that stage too. You could ask, are they comfortable for you to ring them or to email them if you haven't heard, if that's okay? I again, during busy periods of my career when I've been recruiting, would often actually invite the candidate to contact me. So I don't think it's a bad practice to suggest, to take the initiative yourself without being too pushy, but to say, to check what kind of time frame is okay. If I haven't heard back from you in 2 weeks, as you said, get their commitment, but also make sure you've got an email and a phone number to contact them. I think with internal teams, you expect that if you've had an interview, you will get that call back. You'll get some kind of acknowledgement, but it may not be until the very end of the process. So the sad thing, I guess, is that you can still be left hanging for months or weeks and only get that rejection at the very end of a process. So I guess as a candidate, you start to realise as the weeks drag on and no one's called you that maybe it's not looking as positive, but you can really only go as far as you can in terms of perhaps just saying, checking in with them, making it easy. I suppose what my tip would be also, make it easy for the person on the other end just to give you a quick response on an email, as opposed to they need to ring you and give you a 20-minute debrief. I think if you can make it simple so that you can at least find out that the process is still running and they haven't made a decision, then that should be fine, I think.
And let's say candidates are able to connect with someone to get feedback, what should they be asking? What's valuable to know for next time?
So you're talking about if they haven't been progressed, or
if they haven't been progressed, sorry, yes, to clarify. Yeah.
I think most recruiters are good at giving feedback, and most people, I think, would ask for feedback. It's probably good to think about that before you make the call, in case I think we're all only human, and sometimes when you hear that you haven't got it, your first feeling is feeling crushed if you'd been excited. So it's having to quickly go, okay, that wasn't the news I was hoping to hear, but thank you for letting me know, and working through whether there's feedback on what you could do differently, or how they rated your performance in the interview. Often it may not be related to the interview, it may be a higher level of skills or something, but it's worth asking so that you know if you could have done anything better or things that you could work on, and asking for that to say, is there something I could work on to improve my chances next time?
Just one other thing in terms of feedback is how you receive it. I think, when you actually get a call from your recruiter or the hiring manager to describe what were some of the things that didn't go so well, it's really important not to react negatively or come across as aggressive or defensive, because that kind of basically spoils their impression of you. And, when you're thinking about maybe there might be callback chances, you're basically kind of burning the bridge there. Instead, maybe a good thing to do would be to reflect back on why did they perceive it as such, right? In terms of how did you communicate your idea? And maybe that's an area for you to then go back in your own spare time to reframe or rejig the way that you describe a certain experience or put across certain ideas.
Reflection can be, we talked about this last time, would be something that not everyone wants to embrace all the time or for any length of period, but it's a really good practice to put in place after you've been through a process like this. What's a positive of this, I guess, even if you've not progressed through the stages, but you've presented well and you've asked for good feedback. Is there a silver lining, Anna?
Yeah, I think there is. I think you always need to take on that feedback, feel good when you come out of an interview. It's important that you reflect on every part of the process, I guess you could say. And, as I said, I'm very big on giving feedback, and I think I like
for people to take that on board, because I think people just learn from that experience, take on that information to their next opportunity. And, I think you have to stay strong through interview process, through a job process. There are always going to be times where you feel let down, that you wish you'd got something and you didn't. And you just have to learn from that, move forward, and put the same amount of energy that you had in that interview straight into the next one.
Thank you. Now, while we just gather, we've got quite a few questions from the audience. Thank you, everyone. So we're going to kick off with those, but we have got a question that I've got to start us off. So what might a second or follow-up interview look like? We touched on that sort of, if you do progress and it's not straight to contract, what might the next one look like? What does that look like, and how might it be different, and how might they prepare differently? Samantha, would you be able to help us out?
Sure. So for your second interview, I think it's pretty much two things, right? Either it's going to be a deeper dive into your technical skills or the specifics that they are looking for in the job, in which case you then really want to prepare for more tangible examples of where you've demonstrated whatever it is, right, that you think they're looking for. And the other would be really just another pair of eyes. So in many of the organizations that I've been with, we do more interviews to test for consistency. So, not trying to say, tell them the same stories again and again, but tell them things that line up with who you are, right? So if you've been telling us all along that you're a very creative person, maintain that consistency. Don't suddenly portray a second side of you, like a golem, and then, kind of make interviewers wonder, who is this person really, right? First he's saying this and then he's saying that. And then I guess the other tip would be to prepare more examples so that your interviewers, when they compare notes, they have more data points to discuss who and whether you are a really good fit for the role or not.
Thank you. We're going to move on to some more questions, rapid fire from the audience. So would you advise connecting with interviewers on LinkedIn prior to the interview? Anna, I'm going to throw to you.
Yeah, sure. I would say that's not a bad thing. I think LinkedIn is there for a reason, and I think that there's absolutely no harm in connecting with somebody that you're going for an interview with. I have a manager that
Links in with every single person that she speaks to and every single person that we speak to. I've got no issues if people want to link in with me. That's absolutely fine. But I also don't want people stalking me on email every 2 seconds. So just be very careful. Connecting is one thing, emailing is another. So just be very, very careful with that.
Can I give you the flip side to that? I don't necessarily agree with that. I think, again, in your industry, if you're a recruiter or you're a sales or business development, that's the norm. People connect, you meet someone, you connect. Having recruited a lot in financial services with a lot of very conservative investment bankers and financial advisors, they're not looking for you to ping them a LinkedIn before they've even met you. And some of them I know wouldn't regard that as very well. So no, I think you look at the sector. I mean, if you're in marketing or something edgy, contemporary, that's fine. But if it's a more conservative role type, not every stakeholder wants to have a LinkedIn because they don't even know if they're going to hire you yet too. And they may not need to interact with you if you're not successful. So I think you really got to be careful about who the person is. I wouldn't be doing it before the interview because it could, in some companies, that could disadvantage you as some people don't like it. So I think it just depends on where you're going with that.
It's good to have the dual view, and I think it's a timely opportunity for me to just quickly promote and refer back to what was mentioned earlier on about the tertiary and secondary sort of networks and how you tap into them and the sort of things you want to ask them. I mean, these are the sorts of questions that you might explore with your broader network around what do I need to ask and how's that going to land with that sort of that sector if it's unfamiliar to you. We do have an upcoming program at the university that will enable our alumni to connect to each other more easily, and to sort of these might be one of the questions that you would ask your fellow alumni, and those students who are already connected to alumni through our mentoring programs know that very well. I'm going to move on to the next one, so thank you, Brains Trust. This one's about negotiating salaries. So how do you go about negotiating salaries when do you get to that point in the interview process? So we did touch on it before of that do and don't, but perhaps someone could expand on when is the time for that? When do you see that happening? Is it in the interview process at all?
My perspective is it should never be in the interview process, but and I think most professional teams, it's not part of an interview, it's part of a one-on-one conversation, it's part of either the pre-screening and it's part of the debrief conversations, again, in confirming salary expectations. So it'll always be with the recruiter, internal recruiter or HR representative. It may be the manager in certain companies, but you don't really want to get into, it's not a great idea to get into a conversation on salary in the interview anyway. That's a big no-no. I think Anna and Samantha would probably agree with that.
Yeah, that's right. I think especially for many graduate programs and entry-level roles, salaries unfortunately are pretty much fixed with a very, very small margin for negotiation. So especially when you're coming in with zero, formal work experience, just be careful in terms of how hard you want to try to bump yourself up just by that little bit. because it's quite easy to come across as overly aggressive at that point when you actually have no credibility to do so. Another one that I get quite frequently is from people who have maybe about 2 to 3 years work experience. Again, just be really careful, because it's not that you're coming with 10 to 15 years worth of work experience. Just be prepared that recruiters or employers might still view you at the same level as a graduate. And there may not be that big a margin for you to, again, negotiate much more. So again, it's one of those, manage your expectations carefully.
I'm going to take another audience question, and this is a bit of a rolling it up. So I'm hitting a couple of questions here around, it's actually, they've answered their own question around what to do when you're stuck and you can't answer, and is it acceptable to have pre-written notes with you during a virtual interview? So I think that there's something there around, which we touched on earlier, but perhaps someone can address those two parts of the question. So what do you do when you can't answer a question?
I'm happy to jump
yeah
quickly on that and then throw to the others. We did talk about that. I think it's quite common. I think, again, prepare yourself for that question that you can't answer and have a line ready to say, that's an interesting question. I'll just consider the best example I can give you. And that might be a good time to refer down to your notes, or it might be a case of taking a breath, having a sip of the water that's in front of you and saying, thanks for that question, and then taking a pause, having your drink, and then if you need to ask something more because you didn't understand it or you just don't know how to respond to it, ask them another probing question to say, do you mean ABC, or would you like me to talk about this? So whilst your mind is sort of catching up. But practice that calming technique too, I think, in front of the mirror in the bathroom or on your iPhone, just to basically be able to pause gracefully and say, that's a great question, or I'll just consider that. Just have a line that sounds comfortable to you. It's okay to take a break. It's okay to pause and have a sip of water and ask a question back.
Thank you. I've got go Samantha.
Sorry, Meg.
No, not at all.
Yeah, I was just going to say that the reality is sometimes interviewers do also want to stress test candidates and ask questions that they know, candidates may not be able to answer. And that really is a reflection of how they see you dealing with, say, a very difficult client in the future, or, senior management. And we may not always have the answer. So that's perfectly fine. So maybe asking for clarification questions, maybe asking them for a little bit more time to think is perfectly normal, rather than presenting, a completely absurd answer just because you wanted to talk and fill the silence.
So they're attempting to see how you approach the question as much as what your answer might be. Yeah, very helpful. Thank you both. Anna, I've got one for you. In your experience of interviews first come best dressed, for example, they come across as an amazing candidate, would you still keep interviewing? And I'll put this one because we talked about it a bit earlier, of sort of when you make your assessment, I guess that speed that it can happen.
Sorry, could you repeat that again for me, Meg?
Absolutely. In your experience, are interviews first come best dressed? And I think the reference is, for example, they come across as an amazing candidate. Do you still keep interviewing? I think that means for that individual, but potentially for others as well. So I'm asking the question along the lines of what we discussed earlier around how quick you can make an assessment.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, at the end of the day, an interviewer will continue interviewing. It's not necessarily about
keep interviewing until you've got the best candidate. It's actually sometimes about interviewing until you've got 2 or 3 great candidates that you can present, because a lot of the time clients will want more than just one person to be presented. You've got to understand that recruiters or clients will only bring the best of the best in, I guess you could say, because of we can't interview everyone. It's the same understanding of we can't call every single person that applies for the job. So, I think, yes, we do keep interviewing until we find great candidates, but it's not just about best come, best serve necessarily. It's about presenting the right ones. I don't know if my answer's coming across in the right way.
What you're trying to say is there are some companies too that will do the best they can and assess everyone before making a decision, and there's lots of government or traditional corporate organisations who pride themselves on that. But the reality is there's a lot of contract recruitment that goes on where a manager, yes, there might be 2 or 3 people, and they, as soon as the best candidate has had an interview, they cancel the others. So the reality is it can vary depending on the sector, depending on the style of hiring, but typically not for permanent recruitment, I would say, but, you know, there's exceptions to everything. So whoever asked the question, I would say be prepared for the fact that, unfortunately, it can be the first best candidate if they're in a hurry to get someone on quickly.
There's so many variables. And I think, as we had last week, we could talk about those variables all night probably, and we continue it during the day. So I'm going to wrap up for tonight. I hope you don't mind. Thank you, panellists. We'll just do some housekeeping before we say our final thanks. We've got some upcoming events. Coming up. There will be some more Ask Alumni live sessions in the coming months, with live discussions planned for October and November in collaboration with MDHS. So our next session will focus on the future of health careers, and that's on Thursday the 22nd of October from 6 till 7 p.m. So please keep an eye out for future communications. Before we let you go tonight, I'd also like you to complete the evaluation survey, or ask you to please complete the evaluation survey, which has just come up now. Your feedback is really valuable to us, and it plays a really vital role in shaping our programming for the future. You're also going to the running to win a prize. Minor motivation, but I think the feedback to us is really important, so please do. Before we finish, I'd like to encourage you all to consider sharing insights and experiences from your own career journeys with our current students through the Ask Alumni mentoring program. Our online platform allows students to reach out to alumni to have a one-off 30-minute conversations over the phone, by video conference, or in person when we are so allowed. And it's convenient for anyone around the world to be a mentor. As you take your own steps to advance your career, please help a student take their first steps into the workforce as an Ask Alumni mentor. Now, important, and the most important of tonight, is to say thank you. Samantha, Liz and Anna, it's been great. I've really valued and loved the chats we've had last week and this week, and I think it's been really insightful for our participants. So on behalf of everyone, thank you. My sincere thanks to you for sharing your time, your insights and your advice. And now, thanks to everyone, and good night. I hope you have a lovely time.